is a little tour. I think many of you know Cinthia Silva, but today for CxXchange Success Hour, we are going to be talking about executing change in your CS program. So just walked through a number of things that are changing, and you're probably making lots of plans for change as well. And so we thought that this would be a good topic to start the new year off. So I'm going to just take it off of the share for a second so that Cinthia, you can just say hello and make certain people know who you are. Maybe people don't even know what you do and things like that. So maybe it's a good idea to introduce yourself.
Sure, of course. Thanks, Jan. Yeah, there's a lot of change, and that's why this topic's so timely, isn't it? It's just so funny. Just here at CS Office Hours / Success Hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, for those who don't know me, I'm Cinthia Silva. I am in customer success for NASDAQ. And when I tell people that, the first thing they say is, how is an exchange in a SaaS business? And so basically, we have a fintech division because we have obviously, many companies IPO on our exchange. And essentially we have risk products and surveillance products and all sorts of things for specifically for the financial sector. And so I was hired by NASDAQ 2.5 years ago to help them launch the CSM program. So it was a really unique opportunity to be at such a big firm to do something new. So it's been nothing but change for me, and kind of navigating that through NASDAQ, and obviously coming here at office hours working with Jan has been a huge help to me. And that's really why it was Jan's idea. Like, let's talk about some of the things that you've kind of encountered and share it with others, because I'm not alone. I'm certain we all have initiatives that we want to bring up. And it's challenging to actually make them, bring them to life, right? So really excited to talk about this topic.
Yay. All right. Is everyone ready? We'll dig into the topic. All right,
Do
I'll
it.
share my screen again. So, and just as a reminder here, we're recording this session. Raise your hand if you want to ask a question or contribute in some way, or just come off mute. We are an open and trusted forum. It's a place to build your network. We're all into continuous learning. And be sure to look in the chat and in the Slack for all the links to these things, including not only our slides today, which will have lots of resources and things here, but also our breakout notes and things like that for when you go to the breakout session. So going back to our topic here, executing change in your CS program. Now, I don't know how many of you were around for, sorry, I'm trying to just get so I can see everybody. I don't know how many of you were around for our summer series on change management. Or if you haven't heard me talk about Britt Andreatta, then you're going to hear a lot more about it today. And again, and kind of always, that's one of my favorite authors is Britt Andreatta, and the way that she talks about neuroscience and brings it into a language we can all understand and how we work in business. But it's also a book that we read actually for book club. But the first thing to remember, there we go. Thank you, Marianne. Exactly. There it is. Wired to Resist, always nearby. She has 4 different books, and Wired to Resist is sort of like the, what is it, like that entry level, or the, what do they call it? That drug that you start with,
The gateway. It's
the gateway drug.
Into, yeah,
Wired to Resist is the gateway drug. And it's really basically kind of the premise of it is that the way that neuroscience and change is related is that let me go back for a second. Sorry, I wasn't going to talk about Britt Andreatta in the book. So let me just go tell you really quickly for anybody who isn't familiar with her. But basically, we resist change. She has a number of different books. So there's also How We're Wired to Grow. And so we're wired to learn, which is why we all come together, right? We're wired to what is the other one? There's a couple others. Just the way that we collaborate. We all like to work in teams and collaborate, and we network naturally. Community is something that comes natural to us, and we all really want to belong, right? And so all of those things then are things that we are actually just wired to do in our brains. So the thing about that I just wanted to mention briefly is to remember that as we're trying to, we have these big plans at the beginning of the year and we want to execute on change, it's important to remember that change is emotional. And not everyone is going to be on board with it and excited about it where you are now. Because when you think about it, you don't get excited until you get to the end of your journey here. And so you've been thinking about all of these things that you want to change. So you've already gone through all of these emotions and now here you are excited. But there are other people who are going to be earlier in this change journey and they're not necessarily going to be feeling as excited. So I just want to mention that to you, and everyone can download the slides and refer to these as well. The other thing is the type of change that we plan isn't always the same. There are some things that are just like a little pebble, right, on a trail. It's not like a big change. You have to remember to change, like, oh yeah, I need to log in over here now, kind of thing. But it's not like that big a deal. Once you get through that disruption, you kind of get over it. And there's other things that are really long and intense, or long and steady treks, right? These are different types of change journeys. And when you think about the difference in that journey, you can think about how you need to set up your team and how you need to help reinforce that change along those journeys and helping them prepare for what they're doing. So the emotion too is where you're really going to talk about the why and getting them on board with the idea of it and what's in it for me with him, right? And then the other is helping them understand what journey we're going to take together, because not every project and not every project plan is the same. So that's just two things I wanted to just remind you about before we sort of dig in. And Cinthia, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about, as we get into this slide around planning and execution?
Yeah, I mean, those are two good setup slides, Jan,
Oops.
because really, we know that the change journey, people handle it differently, and and I would, anybody actually who's going through it, like trying to initiate a new initiative, or project, I would definitely recommend reading Wired to Resist, because I do think it helps you get perspective for yourself and for others. And so, in terms of planning and execution, we were talking about this, and we broke it down into 4 stages, really. First of all, identify what you want to improve or implement. Identify who should be involved, right? Which stakeholders are key to the process that you need to get buy-in from. And then ultimately, what does that look like? The projects, the plan, the people, and then ultimately the buy-in. And then, of course, execution. And this can't be stressed enough, because I think all 4 of these stages are areas where you can get stuck and maybe even abandon it, right? I think we've all been there where we're just like, I'm just not getting anywhere. And really, some of the key things, the key takeaways that we're going to probably dig into, as well, is you have to celebrate the small wins. You have to like take how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I think this is how we kind of broke it down. What are your thoughts on this, Jan?
Yeah. And, before we really dig in, I want to tell a story, because usually I'm all about change. Like there are different types of personas in terms of who, if people are open to change or not. I'm usually all about it. But there was years ago, there was a situation where they were going to change where marketing wanted to change where we put all of our business slides. And this is when I was in sales and I was on the road a lot. And so the idea of having to put all of my slides on, on their sort of cloud-based, place, it made a lot of sense, but it just didn't work for me, because every time I would go into a hotel room, the last thing I was able to do is download something. It would take forever and it would just fail. And I just hated the whole idea of it. And I was very, very resistant to it. And part of it too was they threw it on me. They came to me and they said, this is what we're doing.
Yep.
They didn't involve me, right? And so when you think about it, when you identify what you want to improve, and you think about like what your current program is, where your challenges are, what the impact and benefit is, or any sort of analysis that you're going to do, you also then need to think about who are the stakeholders and how are you bringing them in, right? It's really just, you want to bring them in. Bring them in when you identify who the stakeholders are, bring them in on how they define the challenges and things like that. And keep in mind that there are different types of personas, and there are going to be some people who are really resistant to change, and they might want to insist everything's fine. Everything's fine, right? You don't need to change at all. And so it's part of dealing with all of those different folks that you want to think about when you're starting to incorporate, and thinking about too, then how you prioritize that as well once you get to it, because there might be some, if you're trying to plan for a lot of change at the beginning of the year, there might be some change that you might need to let go. So if you are going to have to let go of something, where do you, it's sort of like when you're negotiating what your BATNA is, like what's the most important thing versus, well, I can let go of this, right? So like knowing what your bottom line is, if this is the key thing, then really think about, really get involved in thinking about who those stakeholders are, right? And decision makers, influencers, champions, and end users, what the personas are and what types of personas. So think about too, is this internal change that you're doing, or is it external change, or is it both? Sometimes what happens at the beginning of the year is you're changing over accounts, right? And if you're changing over accounts, then you have internal change that you're planning for, but you also have to think about how you're communicating and planning that change for the customers as well, right? So identifying who all the stakeholders are if you're going to implement change. Now, Cinthia, I know that you've also had a lot of change that you've been planning for over at NASDAQ. Maybe can you share a little bit kind of some of the things that may have come up that you didn't expect, or other things that are like, that you were able to plan for in advance?
Yeah, definitely. And it's essentially this big analysis. And Jen, you and I worked on that, like kind of looking at constructing a roadmap and essentially to make a kind of data-driven decisions. So I did a bunch of analysis looking at segmentation, customer journeys, project lists, impact benefit analysis, quantifying all of those, and then taking data to kind of set up a roadmap. So it was really intense analysis. And when I showed it to my boss and then our leadership, they loved it. They were like, yes, this is how we should be making decisions. But then, okay, great. So now we have to go implement it. And so this goes back to what Jan was saying about stakeholders, right? Like I had to look at it, see, work with peers like Jan and others to say, like, do these things make sense? What should we, what should we leave and what should we take out, or blah, 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 and then get that buy-in internally. And then the next thing was like, okay, again, back to like, how do you eat an elephant? We had to start somewhere. So we were like, okay, let's start with the journeys and then the plays. And we're going through that process right now. And essentially, the first thing I realized, and actually, even when I was doing the journeys, I reached out to individuals within different sectors. So we know with the journeys, there's different stages, right? And I did like a full funnel, like the top of the funnel all the way to the post sale. So pre-sale and post sale motions, these journeys.
Right. So let's
So
just step back a sec. So what she's talking about in terms of the journey is the first thing Cinthia did was she mapped through what the current journey was, all the way from when the customer first learned about it and marketing was the only one interacting, through sales, all the way through the post-sales motion. And so she was looking at, what do we currently do to understand where her gaps were and where some of the challenges were and where the customers were getting stuck. And then that's how she started to then work with different groups in her company to kind of dig into, what do we need to do and update.
Exactly. And this was critical too, because even at that stage, because again, that was during the whole analysis phase, to just say, and basically everyone was like, well, we've never written this down. Like we don't have it anywhere. And it's everybody does it differently. It really pisses me off. Like, you know what I mean? And I'm like, perfect. Now you can tell me what it is and what it should look like. And so what was good about that was when I completed the analysis and started, talking to leadership about it, I went back to those same people. Perfect. Listen, we're trying to really get things organized. We're trying to set those boundaries. It's really selling it to them, right? So that they can back to the WIFM. What's in it for me? We want to make sure that you're not like overstretched. Or that you're doing the type of work you should be doing and within certain parameters. And so I went back and said, here, like what do these plays? What should they really look like? And so we really dug in. And anyway, we're going through that process now. And it really, I think in the long run, it becomes a little bit tricky because you have to deal with and navigate different personalities. But it's, in my opinion, the way to do it, because when you collaborate right away, if you've got skin, the person who's helping you's got skin in the game, and they're going to help you see it through because they themselves contributed to it.
Randy, what's your comment or
Well,
question?
I completely agree. I guess the question would be, does your level of making or implementing that change kind of depend upon the ultimate stakeholders you have to involve? Because, you could have a great idea and implement change and have data, but obviously if you don't have someone that has that authority level that your other employees will take that information and then make that change versus as you saying it, you could do it, but they're not going to necessarily follow because you don't maybe have the authority or maybe don't believe you. So the
Right.
stakeholders obviously is dependent upon the ability to define that idea so that it is followed appropriately
Yep.
versus just kind of just blindly, let go.
Right. So Randy, that's a situation where if you don't have the authority to execute the change, right, but you are working on this change project, then that's especially a situation where, going back to the slides, where you need to think about who the stakeholders are and how you engage them and how you get them on board, right? So that's part of your plan then becomes first getting the decision makers on board with the idea, right? And when they say, yeah, you're right, we need to make this change, and I'm going to be your sponsor, your executive sponsor on this, then you need to also make certain that you're involving people who it's going to impact or who need to be involved. So you really want to sort of map out all the various stakeholders and think about who you're going to involve and at what stage you're going to involve them in, and that sort of thing. You also, sometimes you think about who a champion of the change might be and getting them on board. And then at some point you need to identify who the detractors are and how you're going to engage with them, because it's critical too to think about how you get them on board and turn them around from being detractors. They can actually prevent change from happening, right? Kimberly, did you have a thought or question?
Yeah, kind of related to what Randy was bringing up. I've been thinking a lot lately because, I'm coming from kind of higher ed and have kind of that ed tech perspective, and higher ed is known for being notoriously slow with change. And so I've been thinking a lot about how creating like things like, for instance, in higher ed specifically, right? But I think this relates to other organizations. Like some things that really seem to get everybody fired up to change are, if a school is like in danger of losing its accreditation, right? Like there's this perceived external threat, like you're not going to have a business school in 2 years if like you don't fix this now, or if someone's like, we're going to give you a ton of money, but you have to do these couple of things. And so I was just kind of thinking about, for all industries, like what, ways to potentially, I hate to say it, but ways to potentially bring almost like an external fear or like an external
An urgency.
urgency. Yeah. Like, cause I remember in this culture amp thing, they were saying leaders sometimes like to be like, oh, everything's great. But actually, if they're more transparent, like, no, we're screwed if we don't fix this. Like, it kind of like fires people up.
But there's different types of change, right? So losing an accreditation, that's a big deal. So that might fall into a quick hike or a long and intense, thing that you need to address. But there's other types of change projects. When you are, say, moving over to a new CS platform or something like that, which is going to take a lot of work for a long time. And people might think like it's something that's more like this, like intense or steep hill, and there might be times when it is, but ultimately it's a long and steady trek to do something like that. So identifying the type of change and how much change you have going on at one time is important in terms of how it's perceived and how you get people on board. and how
Yeah,
much
and a quick
resistance.
thing too, I wanted to kind of go back to like when Randy's question too about like getting
Yeah.
stakeholders, to kind of respond. I think one thing, and I'm guilty of this too, is if you have an idea and then you bring it up to your boss, you say, hey, we should fix XYZ. Okay, how? Like if you want it, you have to learn how to manage up. If you have an idea, if there's a problem that you see, or if there's an inefficiency that you think should be corrected, you got to do the work. You have to, and my analysis was super deep. You don't need to go that deep, but before I bring anything to my current leader, I flesh it out to some extent or other. So when we meet, I literally send him an agenda ahead of our meetings, by the way, too. Here's 3 things, because we have 45 minutes. I'm gonna pray that I'm gonna get them all in within that time. Here's 3 things I want to cover during our call. He loves it. And then I come on and I'm like, hey, here's an update on XYZ. Here's an idea I have, and I'll flesh it out to some extent or another. Because one thing, if you want to get a buy-in quickly, or you want to really make moves, something on an idea, don't just throw it and give your leader a homework assignment, because they're extremely busy. But if you do some of the work and you do some of the analysis and you do some of the solutions and say, I don't know if this is right, but here's what I'm thinking, and here's some of the ways I think we can implement it, that's a game changer.
Right. So that you're still open to other ideas. It's not like your way or the highway, but at the same
Exactly.
time, you've done some work into it to be able to say, this is why this is a problem. This is the impact it's having on our customers, or this is the impact it's having on our business. And here are some ideas that I've either gathered or I had on my own and some things like that. What do you think of this? Right. And where are you on board, and where do you see gaps or challenges? Where, what are your insights? And you can do that not just with, your main stakeholders, but with everyone, to kind of give both the why, why is it so critical? Why is it impacting you? Why you should get on board, but also bring in some of your ideas. Tell me what you think about this and how you can be a part of this and make it successful as well. Randy, does that answer some of the thoughts and questions you had, or did you have some
No,
additional?
no, it did. No, it did. I think
Okay.
that conversation answered it. Thank you.
Okay. And so then another thing that I talked about over in the summer, and something I'm thinking maybe I'll even do a course around, we'll see, but something I call DIMAP 3 and communicating C3, which is basically where you document and identify. You have a matrix that you can create, sort of the impact benefits sort of quadrants, and then you can analyze it. When you're looking through and thinking about people, purpose, and plan, and then you're thinking about communication, right? You need to communicate with your customer, with your company, and then thinking about change management and how you communicate change and how you manage that change. So these are kind of high levels. Does that help? We also have a lot of different resources here, and we're kind of just hoping to get you thinking about what sort of change you've been through in 2023, what sort of change you're planning for in 2024, and how you want to approach that. That's kind of what the idea and the topic of today is we're going out to breakout groups. So Linda, one more question, and then we're going to go to breakout groups. And if we can just do the links again over in the chat to make certain everybody has our breakout notes and the slides. Linda, how can we help?
You're on mute. Maybe
Yeah.
if your mic's not working, maybe can you unmute yourself? Or that's not working.
Does she have a question over in the chat? While we're getting Linda's question maybe over in the chat, then I'll just mention here the breakout questions. How have you incorporated stakeholders, leadership, decision makers, champions, detractors, end users? All of those are stakeholders in change projects in the past. And what changes are you planning for 2024? And how are you planning to incorporate collaborators? So that's where we're doing the topics. And is Linda here?
I was just reading what she said, Jan. So I just want
great. Yeah, please do.
quickly bridge a gap. Also, I'm going to turn on my camera, even though I'm sitting in this awkward room. So one thing that Linda brought up is, what if the change keeps happening to the customers and there's constant change in who is supporting them? I know I've come across this too, where the customer success manager is changing, professional services team is changing halfway through the project. I mean, Can you speak a little bit to
Fatigue.
that? And
Change fatigue. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. So if you have already sprung a lot of change on your customers or on your team, or if you're internally, if you've been going through a lot of change, that is something that's really important to consider. That gets back to the emotion, right? And when people are least likely. And it could be that you just can't spring any more change on people right now. It could be that you say, wow, everybody is just up to here with change. We need to just let things settle a little bit and just see how they go. If you can't do that, if you have to change things anyway, then acknowledge it, right? Acknowledge, like, look, we've been going through a lot of change here. Think about 2023 and acknowledge it and have them talking about that. And then give them a vision for the future and say, this is where we are in our change journey, especially when you think about the long and steady change journey. I'll just show that one more time before we head out. But when you think about the long and steady change journey, those are the ones that are really hard to be successful with because they take so long, and it's just more change after more change. Think about when you're doing onboarding, right? When you're onboarding with your customer, and you think about that, sometimes can be a long and steady trek. How do you keep them on board? First of all, you want to make certain, and that was something we talked about here briefly too, any sort of wins that you have, that we're starting, yay, let's celebrate that we hit this milestone, communicate what the milestones are, let them know ahead of time, this is what we're up for, this is where we are in our journey, celebrate any of the things along the way, acknowledge if you are in a fatigue place, right? And let them know with them what's in it for them, and how getting to this place together is really going to be something that's worthwhile for everyone. Help them come on board with that vision. Have them participate in what that vision looks like, what that transformation is going to look like, right? And so if that's happening to your customers, let them know too. Explain to them, this is why I've been going through so much change. But this is what our vision is, and this is where we're going. And we really want you to partner with us and be a part of that, right? Things like that. It's when you're going through change, it can be just as critical to deal with the emotional side of it as any sort of project plan. Okay, totally taking you, we went way over, totally sending you out to breakout rooms. And let me just set that up really quick.
It's going to be real lightning rounds, guys.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
come in hot with your questions.
Do breakout groups. Connect with people on LinkedIn and in the community. And I'm just going to put you in smaller groups so you can get through those more quickly.
Grab a link. If you don't have the links, they're there.
Yeah, get the links. Everybody have the links? All right. Excellent. What about in your room? Which group were you in, Gosha?
I was in group 2. Yeah, we had great ideas as well on both topics.
Yeah. Anything in particular that stood out to you?
I think in the first one, for just incorporating stakeholders, like recognizing, what's important to them and taking them on the journey. And then also, what worked for me in the past was not only calling out the benefits, like what they're gonna gain, but also what's not changing, right? What's changing, what's gonna be different, better, but also what's not changing, what's staying steady.
Yeah, and sometimes reminding them of the current pain, like the reason for change. Yeah, saw a lot of fantastic notes. And what group 8 is still adding more. That's fantastic. What were some of the things, the aha moments, or some things that came out to share with the others? Just have a few minutes.
If you mean specifically from group 8, I don't know if you meant specifically or just
whichever group. Yeah, whichever group.
I was the note taker, which when I get on notes, I can go crazy. But I was just saying that I think there's a real opportunity to, kind of what you guys are doing here today, but I think just in general to empower, kind of intrapreneurs, like those inside
Mhm.
champions who have such a visibility on the changes needed, but not necessarily the tools to make those changes, to either hopefully make them and manage up, or to, find another way to make the changes in the industries from a different vantage point.
Yeah, absolutely. Entrepreneur is absolutely a word. In fact, I used to identify myself as an intrapreneur long before I became an entrepreneur or solopreneur. What other things were coming up for folks as you were discussing this topic?
I think one of the things that has to be in the back of your mind all the time is people will, devil's advocate, they will continue to object to whatever you're doing and find reasons that it's never going to work, or they don't want to be a part of it, or whatever. It's, at the end of the day, the business has to stay in business and hopefully do better than that. And there's a point of acceptance or not where people just got to get on board or leave and stop arguing. I mean, that sounds kind of harsh, but
It varies though. Not everybody is, like, what do they have? Like a negative Nelly,
Right,
or Debbie
right.
Downer, like those names that they kind of like alliterate. But, but for those who are going to be detractors, being able to anticipate that and coming up with a strategy of how to
Mhm.
work with those detractors and to hear from them, but also thinking about ways to get them on board, and some people don't want to get on board, it's true.
Yeah.
And so then how do you help to identify, hey, look, this is someone who doesn't want to get on board. That doesn't have to drag the rest of us down, and that doesn't have to prevent us from getting this project done, and kind of helping to sort of isolate that too. Any other thoughts as we're finishing up here? Because I know that this is a really, big topic, but I want to be sure to
Yeah,
get
Jen,
your
we touched
insights.
on that detractor topic too in our room. And basically, one of the things that I always think of when there's a detractor, I immediately wind up putting my sales hat on and like going into discovery mode, because a detractor might have valid points. Sometimes I think it's a
Mhm.
knee-jerk reaction, like, no, I don't want any change, right?
Mhm.
And that's from fear, right, of change and how it'll affect me, the whole thing. But I think if you just question, like, what is it that you're concerned about? Like, what are the areas, blah, blah, blah. And in certain cases, I think you're right. Certain people just do not want to get on board. They're gonna push. But I think if you sort of like give the opportunity, especially if it's a team setting, for them to sort of expose themselves in terms of like, like what their motivations are for that fear or that negativity against the idea, then you can either figure out like if you can bring them on board, or if you really have to figure out a way to work around them.
Yeah. Great.
Plus you need those negative perspectives. I mean, they do add something to the discussion.
You
So
can have a more full product in the end,
Mhm,
or
mhm.
process, if you anticipate all of the challenges, right? Okay, anything else before we finish up? I know it's late for so many of you, and I don't want to keep you over, but at the same time, if there's any other nuggets that we should all share with each other, some great notes over there.
I heard one thing that I thought was impactful if we're talking numbers. I like the figures.
Yeah.
So one woman in our group, Michelle Hines, had mentioned she's currently implementing, she'll keep us posted in the AI channel on Slack, but one thing she brought up was that when we don't have data to work off of, and when ultimately CSMs, we know better than anyone kind of like what's the true health of those customers. And so one thing that she'd done is when she has extremely complex accounts, which the whole business cares a lot about managing those because they're very high dollar accounts as well. One way that she was able to get some people on board was by tying a component of the efficiency gap. And so she was able to get some budget for an AI tool. I believe it's called Guide. Guide with 2 E's. But this tool has enabled her to be able to influence like multiple different stakeholders kind of all at once, versus having a 1 minute or a one meeting that's 30 to 60 minutes and then assuming people might go back and reference the Zoom. This has allowed her to boil things down to like a 5 to 7 minute overview, translate it in multiple languages. So this is something that can be leveraged internally, but also they're leveraging it now externally with their customers as well to keep those really complex accounts at more of a, it's obviously a very sophisticated way to do things, but allows them to kind of figure out what's going on and communicate everything back to stakeholders and complex accounts as they're working through different changes. So I thought that that was just a really interesting, quantifiable way to just kind of measure impact and get some of the ways alleviated too.
And that's so, when you're thinking about your communication plan and some of your challenges, especially for like international teams or international customers, maybe there are AI tools that can help to translate, maybe there are ways in which when we're all working global and so many different hours of the day, maybe there's a way to sort of translate, use these tools to help translate and create, add some of that nuance, right? That otherwise might be lost either in the language change or time change, right? So, all these different types of projects that you're thinking about, think about what the elements are that are going to lead towards the success or their challenges. And, that's not always just a project plan. Obviously being organized and knowing all those elements are important, but sometimes it's stakeholders, politics, people, emotions, change fatigue. All these different elements are things to think about as you start to embark on any sort of big Q1 changes. So hopefully this got you off to a good start. And remember, continue the conversation in Slack. And we'll see you next week. Next week, Percy Rose is going to be co-leading 2 sessions in a row. One is going to be around enterprise customer journeys. And so it's really like the high touch, complex journeys. And then the other is around value and delivering value and outcomes, customer outcomes. So it's kind of a 2-parter, but it's also really connected to, when you're developing sort of change processes and what kinds of things you need to do in your CS program. So looking forward to continuing the conversation. Now, there's Percy. Say hi.
There he is. Hey,
Yeah.
Percy.
Hey.
Looking forward to
Excellent.
those sessions. Those are going to be fire.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks
everybody.
so much, Cynthia. Appreciate you joining in and leading today. All
It's
right.
so great to be here.
Thanks,
Thanks everybody.
Cynthia.
Have a great week,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.